At only 43, Sal Mineo found himself trapped in a moment that could destroy everything. What began as a clandestine tryst, whispered promises behind closed doors, ended in the blinding light of a police raid. Sirens cut the night, doors slammed, and shame threatened to swallow him whole. In that instant, the once celebrated teen idol, the boy who had stolen hearts and rebel without a cause, saw the fragile walls of secrecy crumble. How had Hollywood's bright young star, once on every magazine cover, been reduced to hiding in the shadows, praying not to be exposed? To understand how Sal Mineo arrived at that dangerous crossroads, we must go back to where it all began, to a small apartment in New York City, where a boy with dark eyes and boundless dreams first discovered the stage. Salvatore Mineo Jr. was born on January 10, 1939, in the Bronx. His parents were Sicilian immigrants trying to build a modest life in America. His father, a coffin maker, carried the scent of wood and varnish home on his clothes each night. His mother, passionate and protective, believed her son was destined for something greater. She enrolled him in dance and acting classes, hoping the stage would offer more than the hard labor that defined their daily lives. The Bronx of the 1942 was noisy and alive. Streetcars rattled past brick buildings. Radios spilled swing and early jazz into open windows. Kids played stickball in alleys while war headlines echoed from newsstands. But beneath the neighborhood's energy lay tension. Immigrant families like the Mineos faced suspicion and subtle prejudice. Italians were still viewed by some as outsiders, their accents mocked, their traditions misunderstood. For Sal, the stage became refuge. By the time he was 10, he was already performing on local television and appearing in children's theater productions. His dark hair, wide eyes, and natural charisma set him apart. He could sing, dance, and command attention without effort. Yet even as he discovered his gifts, society's expectations pressed hard. Boys were told to be tough, to fight on street corners, not to pirouette in dance studios. Sal endured teasing, but his mother's unwavering belief fueled him. Broadway in the late 40s was dazzling with bright marquees and velvet curtains. New York was a cultural hub, pulsing with energy from post-war optimism. Veterans returned home, couples filled dance halls, and the American dream was painted in technicolor on silver screens. For a boy like Sal, theater was more than escape. It was a promise. He dreamed of joining the actors he saw in posters outside theaters, men with broad shoulders, chiseled faces, and names already etched into legend. In his teenage years, he joined a touring company, finding work in small productions. The discipline of rehearsal shaped him, while the applause of strangers gave him confidence. Still, inside he felt the weight of difference. He was Italian-American at a time when assimilation was prized. He was sensitive in a world that demanded toughness, and quietly, he was beginning to feel desires he could not name. Urges society labeled forbidden. The cultural backdrop of the early 50s made those urges terrifying. McCarthyism targeted not only communists but anyone seen as morally suspect. Magazines warned parents to shield their children from perversion. In that climate, Sal learned early that secrecy was survival. But secrecy could not dim ambition. By 15, he was auditioning for Broadway, hoping the stage lights would outshine the doubts and shadows gathering inside him. And soon, they did. Sal Mineo's talent carried him from neighborhood stages to the glittering world of Hollywood. The boy from the Bronx was on the cusp of becoming a national sensation. Sal's break came with a role most actors could only dream of. In 1955, director Nicholas Ray cast him as Plato in Rebel Without a Cause. At only 16, Sal stood alongside James Dean and Natalie Wood, two rising stars who would become icons. The film captured a restless generation, teenagers in leather jackets, drag races under the Los Angeles night sky, whispered secrets about loneliness and desire. Plato, the character Sal embodied, was fragile, tender, and misunderstood. For many, he was the first coded gay figure ever shown on a major screen. Audiences didn't know how to name it, but they felt it in Plato's longing glances and quiet devotion to Dean's Jim Stark. The performance electrified critics. Sal earned an Academy Award nomination for Best Supporting Actor, making him one of the youngest nominees in history. Overnight, he became a teen idol. Magazines splashed his face on covers. Fan clubs formed in small towns across America. His dark eyes and gentle vulnerability set him apart from Hollywood's typical tough guys. He wasn't the rugged cowboy or the soldier storming beaches. He was the outsider. And millions of young people recognized themselves in him. The studios, always eager to shape an image, pushed Sal into roles that mirrored his breakout. He played troubled teens in films like Crime in the Streets and Somebody Up There Likes Me. On stage, he brought intensity to Broadway productions, showing that he wasn't just a one-hit wonder. In 1960, his role in Exodus alongside Paul Newman earned him a second Academy Award nomination. Critics marveled at his depth, calling him one of the most promising young actors in the industry. Yet stardom came with its own cage. Hollywood in the 50s was controlled by powerful studios and agents who dictated not just roles but personal lives. Every handshake, every photograph, every supposed romance was carefully orchestrated. Sal was encouraged to date women publicly, to smile for cameras at premieres with a glamorous actress on his arm. Behind the scenes, rumors swirled about his sensitivity, his reluctance to play the typical macho hero. Whispers, in those days, could end a career. Still, Sal rode the wave of success. He recorded music, releasing songs like Start Movin', which sold over 1 million copies and turned him into a pop sensation. He toured television shows, crooning with boyish charm, his voice smooth and warm. Girls screamed in the studio audiences, clutching his photographs. Parents, however, were wary. His characters often flirted with delinquency, and his intensity made some uneasy. The paradox of Sal's image was clear. Hollywood wanted him as both idol and warning. They packaged him as the brooding teen heartthrob, while behind closed doors they demanded conformity. Sal, still barely in his 20s, felt the strain of living two lives. Publicly, he was the rising star. Privately, he was a young man, grappling with identity, longing, and love he could not openly claim. The pressure to perform to be perfect, masculine, and marketable was mounting. And with that pressure came the shadows of a double life that would define his next chapter. Fame brought Sal Mineo into glittering rooms, where music played softly, cigarettes burned slowly, and secrets were traded more carefully than contracts. Behind locked doors, in backyards shielded by hedges, and at parties whispered about, but never advertised. Hollywood's hidden world thrived. It was here that Sal discovered companionship, intimacy, and love that could not be shown in daylight. On the set of Rebel Without a Cause, Sal's bond with James Dean was immediate. Their chemistry on screen mirrored late-night conversations off it. Biographers have noted that Sal confessed to being deeply in love with Dean, a love that was passionate, confusing, and never meant to last. Dean's sudden death in 1955 left Sal shattered. He once said losing Dean felt like losing a piece of his soul. The grief pushed him further into secrecy, as if love itself had become dangerous. Other connections followed. Sal was linked to Bobby Sherman, the young singer who later became a teen idol. Sherman, uncertain about his own desires, reportedly leaned on Sal for guidance, and their affair unfolded through hidden meetings and handwritten notes. But secrecy came with cost. When Sal's engagement to actress Jill Howarth ended abruptly, whispers of his private life grew louder. Hollywood, ever watchful, punished those who strayed from its narrow image of masculinity. Paul Newman's name entered Sal's orbit during the filming of Exodus in 1960. Newman, already a legend with his blue-eyed charm, shared a quiet rapport with Sal. Rumors suggested their bond extended beyond friendship, though Newman, bound by his carefully crafted family image, never allowed such stories to surface. For Sal, the connection was bittersweet, a glimpse of love paired with the sting of distance. There were other liaisons too, fleeting and intense. Marlon Brando, notorious for his magnetic allure, was said to have crossed paths with Sal in those years. Tony Perkins, the brooding star of Psycho, also moved in the same discreet circles. Sal even found a long-lasting partnership with actor and coach Courtney Burr, whose steady presence gave him stability when the industry turned cold. These romances, tender and real, were lived in fragments. Meetings at secluded beaches. Midnight drives down empty Los Angeles streets, handshakes that lingered too long, glances that carried everything unsaid. In an era where morality clauses in contracts forbade immoral conduct, the risk was constant. A single photograph, a careless word, could collapse everything. Sal grew defiant. In 1962, he posed nude for Harold Stevenson's painting, The New Adam, a bold artistic statement celebrating the male body. It was art, but also rebellion. In 1972, he went further, publicly declaring himself bisexual in an interview. "I have a girl in every port," he quipped, "and a few boys too." The honesty was remarkable for its time, but it came with a price. Roles dried up, studios grew wary, invitations stopped coming. Yet in private, he refused to stop living. He loved fiercely, even when the world insisted he could not. Every secret romance became both refuge and risk, and as the walls of Hollywood closed in, danger began to creep closer into his personal life. By the late 1960 seconds, the glow of stardom that had once surrounded Sal Mineo began to dim. Hollywood, which had embraced him as the sensitive rebel, grew colder as rumors of his personal life spread. Studio heads whispered. Producers hesitated. The same qualities that made him unique on screen, his vulnerability, his intensity, were now liabilities in a business obsessed with image. The press, hungry for scandal, circled him. Tabloids hinted at parties, whispered names, and implied affairs with men who were themselves terrified of exposure. For an actor in his 30s, this was professional quicksand. Contracts slipped away. Casting calls that once came daily slowed to silence. By the end of the decade, he was no longer the boy wonder of rebel without a cause. He was the outsider, the risk no studio wanted to take. The cruelty of typecasting compounded his troubles. Because he had refused to Americanize his name, he was often assigned ethnic roles: delinquents, gangsters, or outsiders. The more he pushed for meaningful work, the more doors closed. He took pride in his heritage, but Hollywood punished him for it. By the early 70s, when he came out publicly as bisexual, the industry's rejection hardened into near exile. Financial pressures mounted, the comfortable income of his youth was gone. He turned to stage work, producing and acting in bold plays like Fortune and Men's Eyes, which dealt openly with homosexuality and abuse in prison. It was groundbreaking theater. But to conservative audiences, it was scandal. Critics praised his courage, yet Hollywood distanced itself further. The personal toll was heavy. Friends described him as restless, often anxious, sometimes drifting into reckless choices. Though he found stability with Courtney Burr, his long-term partner, the fear of exposure never fully lifted. Walking into a restaurant meant scanning the room. Leaving rehearsals late at night meant wondering who might be watching. And then came the ultimate crisis. On the night of February 12, 1976, Sal returned home from rehearsal for a play where he had finally found momentum again. As he stepped into the darkness of his West Hollywood garage, a figure emerged, a knife flashed. In moments, Sal was struck, his life taken by a single wound to the heart. The crime scene told a haunting story. His wallet and jewelry remained untouched, ruling out robbery. Rumors erupted instantly. Was it a jealous lover? A rent boy? A punishment for living too openly? The media seized on the most salacious angles, reducing a talented man to gossip headlines. Police investigations wavered. Witnesses contradicted each other. And in the end, the truth of his death remained tangled in doubt. At 43, Sal Mineo's story seemed to collapse in tragedy. But the crisis that ended his life also sparked questions about the cost of secrecy and the prejudice that had shadowed him from the beginning. Though Sal Mineo's life ended violently at 43, his later years carried both resilience and defiance. After Hollywood's doors shut, he found a second home in theater. On stage, he was no longer typecast. He played complex, conflicted characters, often choosing roles that reflected his own struggles. In Fortune and Men's Eyes, he not only produced but acted with raw honesty, exposing audiences to themes most of Hollywood dared not touch. He believed theater could confront truths that films still buried. Television offered occasional work, Guest appearances on crime dramas and late-night talk shows kept him visible. But the glamour of his youth was gone. Still, he carried himself with dignity, refusing to chase hollow publicity. Instead, he poured energy into writing, painting, and smaller creative projects. Friends recalled him sitting in West Hollywood cafes, sketching or jotting notes, always dreaming of directing his own film. He was preparing for that future when his life was cut short. Off-stage, his private world provided refuge. His relationship with Courtney Burr gave him stability, a sense of home that had long eluded him. They shared an apartment, adopted dogs, and carved out a quiet life amid the chaos of Hollywood. For the first time, Sal tasted something close to peace. Burr later said Sal was happiest during those years, finding comfort not in fame, but in ordinary moments, cooking dinner, laughing over music, or planning the next project. The early 1970 seconds also brought a cultural shift. Stonewall had erupted in New York, and whispers of gay liberation reached Los Angeles. For someone like Sal, who had already declared himself bisexual in interviews, the movement was both encouraging and bittersweet. He knew he had spoken too early for his time, and the industry had punished him. But he also recognized that younger actors might not have to endure the same silence. His tragic death in 1976 froze his story in a moment of mystery. Yet in the decades that followed, re-evaluations of his life began. Critics revisited Rebel Without a Cause, pointing to Plato as a landmark in queer-coded cinema. Writers called Sal one of the first actors in Hollywood to step forward and risk honesty about his identity. His bravery, once dismissed as recklessness, became recognized as pioneering. For those who knew him, Sal's legacy was personal. Natalie Wood remembered his warmth. Directors spoke of his dedication. Fans cherished his vulnerability on screen, sensing something true behind every performance. And for the LGBTQ community, his name became a symbol of both loss and courage. Today, his story resonates differently. In a world where actors can live more openly, Sal Mineo's life feels like both a warning and a gift. A warning of how prejudice can destroy, but also a gift of inspiration, proof that even in secrecy, love and authenticity matter. Sal Mineo's story is one of light and shadow. A boy from the Bronx who became a symbol of teenage rebellion, a young man who loved without apology, and an artist who dared to be himself when Hollywood demanded silence. His life reminds us of the price paid by those forced to hide, and the courage it took to speak truths that could end a career. He was not perfect. He was human. He searched for love in secrecy, carried grief too heavy for one heart, and fought to keep his art alive when the industry turned away. Yet in every performance, from Plato's longing gaze in Rebel Without a Cause to the bold theater he championed, Sal left pieces of himself that still resonate. His murder cut short a story still unfolding, but his legacy endures, in the faces of actors who live openly today, in the films that dared to show vulnerability, and in the conversations about representation that continue decades later. Sal Mineo's life asks us to remember that behind every Hollywood smile was someone fighting battles we could not see. If this story moved you, share your thoughts below. Which part of Sal Mineo's journey resonates with you most? And if you want more hidden stories of Hollywood, stories of love, struggle, and courage, subscribe and join us again, because the past still has lessons to teach, and voices like Sal's deserve never to be forgotten.